Today we're going to be learning Taanit Daf Gimel, continuing on. Let's just do a quick review of what we saw yesterday. In the end, between the Mishnah and the Braita that we ended with yesterday, we saw, again, Braita being an external source, but coming from the same time period as the Mishnah. We saw that there were 4 different opinions about when we start saying the words Mashiva Ruach Morida Geshem, although I should be careful because today we're going to talk about the Mashiva Ruach part, okay? Really, when you talk about Hazkarak Shamim, it should really be just Morid Hageshem. God brings down the rain. So we'll get to the wind part of it today. But let's just assume we're calling it Mashiva Ruach Morid Hageshem, but really, or we can use the words of the Mishnah, Gevurot Geshamim or Alag Shamim. When do we start mentioning rain? We saw either the first day of Sukkot, which we connected with Lulav. If you remember, the Braita connected it with the day we take the Lulav. We saw the last day of Sukkot, which really we explained to mean Shmini Atzeret. In the Braita, it said when you put down the Lulav. And in fact, I think it was Gitu asked yesterday, and I looked this up. We explained it as Shmini Atzeret, and meaning once you stop taking the Lulav, which really means, right, since potentially you could take the Lulav all day of the 7th, but it really begins only on the 8th. Some people understood Rabbi Yehoshua, and I was biased to read it that way based on the way we understand it, because that's when we actually do it. But some people read in Rabbi Yehoshua that it's actually on day number 7, after you put down the Lulav and Etrog, and that you really would, according to him, you would start saying it on the 7th day of Sukkot. So there are some that explain Rabbi Yehoshua in that way. Then we had these 2 other opinions, and it seems the Braita anyway connected between the 2 of them, although we'll see today that maybe not everybody thought that Rabbi Yehoshua was connected to the issue of the Lulav and when we start and when we end taking the Lulav. But we then started to connect these other 2 opinions on day number 2 and on day number 6, which seemed incredibly random, of Sukkot. In the end, we say, oh, well, those connect to this issue of Nisuch HaMayim, the water libations. And we ended with looking at those psukim. If you didn't look at them well enough, I recommend you look at yesterday's sheet where you can see all the psukim really well. And you can see that there's an extra mem. It's really an extra yud and mem in the second day, but we'll focus on the mem because that's what they do. 6th day, there's an extra yud. And 7th day, there's an extra mem. There's a remez, an allusion in the Torah to this Nisuch HaMayim, which was our first reason. Okay, we're going to see some other ones today about where we get Nisuch HaMayim from the Torah from. There's a remez, an allusion to it in those 3 extra letters, where again, each day of the sacrifice are written in the exact same manner. But on those 3 days, there's a diversion of one of the words, digression. It's a little bit different, that word. That gives you this hint to mayim, water. From there, they learn the water libations. So we saw, comes Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, and he says, since on the 2nd day, it starts mentioning this, the first strange thing comes on the 2nd day, that must mean that we're going to start on the 2nd day, and then we're going to connect. That's when they do the water libations, and therefore that's also when we start asking for rain. We're going to assume that when we do the water libation, that's when we're going to start asking for rain. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's on day number 6. Because we only do it on day number 6. Why? And that's where we ended yesterday. Because in the Yud Nisacheha, which is plural. Okay, Niskehem on day number 2 is also plural. But Niskehem means their libations. The libations are what's plural here, like their libations. I'm not sure why he doesn't think that's plural enough. It's actually more plural, but it's a bit of a different plural. But he says Nisacheha sounds like it's talking about maybe because it's many sacrifices have many libations. And then you could just still say 1 libation per sacrifice. Here it's saying Nisacheha. It's plural libations, which means 1 sacrifice has many libations, in which case they say, what is many libations? It must be both the wine, which comes with all sacrifices, and the water. To which we ended with this question on the Gemara. Well, why don't you say many libations means do double the amount of wine, do 2 wine libations? To which he said, well, then we have the allusion of water in those verses because of the mem, yud, mem. So from there, he takes day number 6 where the yud appears, where it's plural. That refers to 2. From the mem, yud, mem, it's clear it's referring to water. Okay, that's where we ended. So now they have a question on this opinion. But wait, if he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera about this issue, that there's a reference to mayim and it starts on day number 2, then why focus on day number 6 and say we start on day number 6? Why don't you just say we start on day number 2? So the answer is, kiktiv nisuch yetera b'shishi u'dichtiv. That's what I said before. The reference, the allusion to 2 nisachim, 2 libations is in day number 6. And that's why he thinks day number 6 is the important one. So again, we have we're connecting two ideas, and this is important to understand. If you say that's when the Nisuch HaMayim began, okay, Rabbi Akiva thinks it started on day number 6. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera thinks it started on day number 2. Then the assumption here is we're going to connect between the Nisuch HaMayim and the asking for rain, and we're going to ask for rain at exactly the same time. We're assuming they're the same idea because they both relate to water and asking for rain, and therefore we're going to connect. Now we have another source. We're bringing a lot of Braitot today, which, as I said, are things that didn't make it into the Mishnah, but from the time period of the Mishnah. Tanya, Rabbi Natan Omer, B'kodesh hasech nesech shechar laHashem. He brings a different source for Nisuch HaMayim from the Torah. He says it's from a verse. It's a very strange verse to use. You'll see why in a minute. This verse is in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 28, and it's in the context of the daily sacrifice. And that's why it's a little bit strange, because we're talking here about the Nisuch HaMayim, the water libations that were done only on the holiday of Sukkot. And yet his proof for it, in other words, it made perfect sense, and we're going to take it from that mayim, the extra mem, the extra yud, the extra mem, which was all talking about the sacrifices that we bring on Sukkot. So it made perfect sense. But to take it from the daily sacrifice is a little bit strange. Okay, but in any case, we're going to leave that question aside, although maybe address it in a minute. Maybe we'll try to come up with a different way. Especially if you're new to Gemara, even if you're not new, you might not, something I like to repeat a lot when we learn, which is sometimes we have questions on the Gemara that are actually really good questions, and there's not necessarily a great answer. And, sometimes we have to just be okay with that. So this is a good question on the sugya as to why they're bringing in the Korban Tamid, the daily sacrifice, as a proof for something that happens only on Sukkot. We'll give a possible answer, but I can't promise that you're going to be convinced by it. That's what I wanted to say. So he says, first let's understand his proof, and then we'll try to give an explanation. Now it says, hasech nesech, which means, right, libate your libations, or something along those words, right? Bring your libations. I'm trying to kind of translate. Hesech comes from the same root as nesech, right? Nesech is the libations, and hesech is a verb. Hesech, nesech, it's the verb for the noun of libations. So it sounds like it's this double language, though, even though it's using the verb form, but it's using the same form, right? The same root in two different ways. It seems to be including two different libations. Now they're going to ask the same question they asked before, that they asked to the other opinion. Once we said nisacha is two libations, and here we say it's two libations, we asked there, maybe it means bring a double portion of wine. If that was what they wanted to tell you, then lichtov kra o hasech hesech o nesech nasech nesech. In other words, then it should have used, even though I did say it was the same root, but it should have said it exactly, hasech hesech or nasech nesech. Why, right? Where then it would be identical, and then we know it's double of the exact same thing. My hasech nesech, because it changes the word a little bit and doesn't use the exact identical word, shmat mina chad demaya v'chad dechamas. And here we learn one water, one wine. So either we could say that he's totally disagreeing, and he thinks the source for Nisuch HaMayim is not from Sukkot, but it's actually from the daily sacrifice. And maybe then you'd say, well, the daily sacrifice some days a year, and in fact, the Nisuch HaMayim, right, there was a debate about whether it's part and parcel of the morning sacrifice on those days, or it's actually some separate thing. This would be a good source for saying it's part and parcel of the daily sacrifice, and there's a allusion to it. That's one option. Another option is that he could really only be coming to explain the question that we ended with on yesterday's daf, which is, how do you know? Because he still thinks the Nisuch HaMayim proof is in that mem yud men in the sacrifices of Sukkot. But instead of answering, how do we know that both are not wine and one is water and one is wine, that we answer because, well, there's an allusion to water and that's our proof. Maybe he wants a better proof. And what he's saying is, since in another place where it talks about libations, it says hasech nesech, we can take that language and kind of bring it over to there and say, therefore, when there's a plural of nisachim, it must mean two different types. Again, it's not the best answer, but it's potentially saying that maybe he's not coming to say this is the source for Nisuch HaMayim. Maybe this is just the source that when we prove by the water libations in those verses of Sukkot that there's two different nisachim, How do we know it's two different ones and not the same? Maybe we can learn it from the language here about the Korban Tamid. Again, it's still a bit of a question why they bring it from the Korban Tamid. Okay, I mean, the reason they bring it from there is because that's where the Psukim appear. They don't have a verse by Sukkot. But how they can learn from the Korban Tamid is, again, a bit of a question, but maybe, again, we can answer it because it is a part of the daily sacrifice according to some understandings, and then we can connect it. Okay, Ella. But now we have a separate question. The Mishnah in Sukkah, if you remember, gave a list for how many days we do all different mitzvot. And one of them was the water libations go for 7 days. Now, assuming that we're connecting the asking for rain, or actually not asking, it's not shoalim, it's mazkirim, the mentioning of Morid HaGeshem, that is connected with the Nisuch HaMayim, which we said is connected according to two opinions. Now, again, another bit of a question on the Gemara, even though the Braita said the first two opinions, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, who said either day number 1 or day number, the end of Sukkot, right, whether it's day number 7 or day number 8, they connected that with Lulav. The other two opinions, it's day number 2 and day number 6, connected it with the Nisuch HaMayim, the water libations. But again, our Gemara here, almost as if they didn't see that Braita, is going to assume that Rabbi Yoshua, who says the end of Sukkot, is also connecting his opinion about mentioning the rains with the water libations. To which the Gemara says, Mane, who possibly holds Nisuch HaMayim is all 7 days? Let's just go through the opinions. Rabbi Yoshua, if it's Rabbi Yoshua, Ne'em Achad Yoma, it should only be 1 day. Now, what day would it be? If, again, you have to assume, even though we didn't say this before, that Rabbi Yoshua would connect to the water libations. He says either the last day of Sukkot or the 8th day, Shmini Atzeret. Then whatever day you mention rain, whether it's day number 7 or day number 8, that's the day you would do the water libations. Here's a good proof, by the way, that maybe Rabbi Yeshua really means day number 7, because nobody thinks Nisuch HaMayim is only on Shmini Atzeret. That's weird. Maybe it's also Shmini Atzeret, but it's definitely on Chag Sukkot. So if you want to connect his day with the Nisuch HaMayim, you'd be hard pressed to say it was really the 8th day, Shmini Atzeret, because that's not really a day of Sukkot. But again, a bit of a difficulty with the sugya, we'll have to leave it. But now we're going to just assume right now, you have to just assume that the sugya is saying, we clearly connect Rabbi Yeshua and the water libations and the day he says we should start saying rain. And either he means, then according to him, the water libations would either be on day number 7 or day number 8 of Sukkot, and only that day. Rabbi Akiva, how many days would you do the water libations? Trei Yomi, because he says you start on day 6. Because remember, Nisacheha was the plural on day number 6. You would do water libations day number 6 and day number 7, and that would be the end of it. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, who says on day number 2, Shita Yomi, would only be 6 days and not 7 days. That's at least the closest, right? At least we have 6 days here. So he would say you start on day number 2, because that's where the extra mem is, right? That starts the mayim. You would do the water libations 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That would be 6 days. So none of them match the opinion of 7 days. So it seems a little bit strange. So the Gemara first suggests maybe it's Lo Olam Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. It is the one who says day number 2. And since we were close, we could get it even closer. How so? Usfira like Rabbi Yehuda de Matnitin, there's Rabbi Yehuda who appears in the Mishnah, who says, Ditnan, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, there's a Mishnah in Sukkah, Bilog hayam nasech kol shmona. Rabbi Yehuda disagreed with the rabbis about 2 things. The rabbi said you use 3 log of water. Rabbi Yehuda said you only use 1. The rabbi said you do it for 7 days. And Rabbi Yehuda says you do it all 8 days, including Shmini Atzeret. So he says you even do it on Shmini Atzeret. Now, if we take his opinion and we don't understand him literally, kol shmona, meaning for 8 days, we can understand that Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera holds like Rabbi Yehuda that you continue on Shmini Atzeret. So now we have this approach of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. You start on day number 2, you end on day number 8, and then it's perfect. Then we have 7 days and we're set. So Nisuch HaMayim kol shiv'ah would really mean not all 7 days of Sukkot, but starting from day number 2, ending on Shmini Atzeret, and then at least we have somebody who fits with 7 days of Nisuch HaMayim, of water libations. And Mapik Rishon u'Ma'ayil Shmini, take off the first day and add the 8th day, and then you're set. But 1 minute. Gemara asks, Umayshna Rishon Dilo, Dechira Mizemayim, B'Sheni Hu Duramize. Why did Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera take off day number 1? Because there wasn't yet a reference to this mayim in those verses. Remember, the mem only appeared in day number 2. Well, if so, Shmini Nami Kira Mize Mayim B'Shvi'i Hu Duramize. remember where the 3 references are: day number 2, day number 6, and day number 7, which would mean that 2 is the beginning and 7 is the end. So it doesn't make sense that Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera would start at day number 2 because there's the reference to the Mayim, and end at day number 8 where there's no reference to water at all in the 8th pasuk, right? In the 8th day. 7th day, it closes the unit. So it doesn't make sense to say that he would say 7 days. So we're going to reject that option. So now the Gemara is going to say, let's go back to Rabbi Yoshua. And remember, I said it was a little problematic in the first place that we were connecting Rabbi Yoshua's date with the idea of the water libations. And that's what in the end the Gemara is going to. So it was a bit of a question. It's not really such a worry because in the end, the Gemara is going to really reject that line of thinking and say something different about Rabbi Yoshua. So we're now going to say it's Rabbi Yoshua, who says again, we ask for rain on the 8th day, or maybe the 7th. I keep saying ask. I don't mean ask. Mention rain. I have to be very careful because it's a big difference, right? Asking is v'tein tal matal. But we mention rain, mazkirim kshamim. We're now going to learn that even though we saw that there was a reference in the verse of this mayim, and nisuch hamayim comes from the Torah based on that, or possibly from the verse, depending on how you understand that part of the korban tamid, the tamid sacrifice, the daily sacrifice. But according to Rabbi Yoshua, there's no reference in the Torah at all to this. And he learned Nisuch HaMayim as what we call Hilchat HaGemira, means it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai is basically a tradition, we claim, passed down to Moshe at Sinai, which basically is another way of saying it's not written in the Torah, but it's an old tradition, much stronger than just a regular rabbinic institution. The rabbis decided to do something. This is something that goes way back. And therefore he says, this has nothing to do with day number 2, day number 6, all those, right? I don't think there's any connection. And what he's also theoretically saying is there's no connection between mentioning the rains and the water libations. The water libations is a whole separate thing. And that's 7 days because we have a tradition about it, period. As soon as we say tradition and halacha l'Moshe Sinai, it gets put on the side. Then it's no longer connected anymore with this issue of mentioning rain. And therefore, there's no question. And we basically say, there's Rabbi Yoshua who says we have 7 days of water libations for that reason, because it's a tradition. And in addition, we mention rain on the 8th day or maybe the 7th day. And that we already connected from before because of lulav. It's when we're finished with the lulav, then we start with the rain. By the way, one way to see that is maybe that by bringing the lulav and etrog, we're already kind of mentioning God's connection to the rain. And you don't need to say it in your prayer because you're doing it when you take the lulav and etrog. And then when we're done with that, then we need to do it some other way. Maybe that's almost his approach. It just came to me right now that maybe that's the way he views it. Okay. And we can't just suggest this without having proof for it. But we're going to show a proof to Amar Rabbi Ami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Nechunya, Ish Bikat Beit Chotan. It was passed down from different names, Rabbi Ami in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who said it in the name of Rabbi Nechunya. Ish Bikat Beit Chotan, Eser Nitiot, Arava, V'Nisuch HaMayim, Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There's 3 things. We often have this threesome when they list things that are Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. I don't know why that is, but we've seen it a bunch of times already. And we've seen this source already before, which is 10 Nitiot, if you remember what this means. In the Shemitah year, you're not allowed to plant or work the land or plow, not only in the Shemitah year, but even 30 days before. But if you have 10 saplings, young trees in a space of 50 by 50 cubits, which is called a Beit Se'ah, then you're allowed to actually plow that entire area up until the Shemitah year because the whole area really needs plowing in order to allow them to grow. And therefore, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. We have a tradition that you're allowed to do this. Arava is that they would surround the altar every day with aravot in the temple, and the times of the temple on the holiday of Sukkot, and Nisuch HaMayim. Those 3 are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay, I see some people are asking, why didn't we mention this before? Well, first of all, this is a big debate. Whether there's some who hold that Nisuch HaMayim comes from the Torah, and that's the source we saw from the Mem Yud Mem. So there's 2 different approaches here. And I guess the more commonly known approach was that one. So only till, right, this is classic of the Gemara where they're having a discussion, only through questions and answers do we finally get to, oh, wait, someone in the Beit Midrash says, wait, I remember hearing there's a tradition that this is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So what's nice about Gemara is you're getting things as they evolve sometimes. That this only came up now because maybe not everybody knew that that statement existed. So till they had all the questions, and then it came up, oh, wait, and then someone told them, oh, do you know this? And then they realized, oh, that fits in, that answers our question. Rabbi Yehuda, okay, so that's the first section. We're done now with the Nisuch HaMayim. So again, we saw this Braita that the first two approaches, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, connected the mentioning the rain to the etrog and the lulav, whether it's specifically when you take them or specifically when you're finished taking them. And then we had the two approaches of connecting it to the water libations because of the day number 2 or the day number 6, two different approaches. And through that, we got into a discussion of what's really the source of Nisuch HaMayim in the Torah. Now we're going to move on to the last section of the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Yoshua. What we're going to focus here is on the Rabbi Yoshua part. Okay, Rabbi Yoshua was the one who said, when we finish taking the lulav, right? That's when we start saying Mashiv Ruach U'Morida Geshem. When would that be? Okay, there's different possibilities. Either day number 7 in the afternoon, right, when you're done, or let's assume we're talking about the he holds really Shmini Atzeret, the main way of understanding him. So when you put down the lulav, so when would that be? That would be, right, theoretically, you could take lulav all day. So when the day ends, we should start saying it at night, or at least in the morning, if not at night. But this opinion said, Rabbi Yehuda says, in the name of Rabbi Yoshua. Okay, now I want to point out one thing. In the Mishnah, our Mishnah, this appeared just in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. But in the Braita, the exact same halacha appeared, but it was Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yoshua. And we're going to see a third Braita where it says that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Ben Betera. So we're going to have to sort of figure all this out. Who is Rabbi Yoshua? Who is Ben Betera? And how does this work in with the Rabbi Yoshua in our Mishnah? Or in the Braita, because he appears in both. So let's go through what the halacha he said was. The chazan in the morning on Shmini Atzeret, right? He ha'acharon maskir, harishon no maskir. So only in Musaf do you say it, not in Shacharit. And then the Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, on the first day of Pesach, Harishon maskir. The first one still says Mashiv Baruch U'Morida Geshem in Shacharit. Ha'acharon in Musaf eno maskir. Already he doesn't say it. Before we go on, we didn't really talk about this when we mentioned yesterday in the Mishnah, but what's the logic here, right? To us, it's so obvious because this is what we do, but it's really not so obvious. Theoretically, you should really start saying it in the morning or at night. Why do we push it off? So some of the reasons, the commentaries try to give reasons. One of the reasons for not doing it at night is because if you do it at night, you don't have a lot of people in shul, and you want everyone to know, like we do a big deal with Tfilat Geshem, and it could be the reason why we wait until Musaf is for the same reason. We saw in Pesach Rosh Hashanah, if you remember, people came late to shul, so they wanted to push it off so you'd have the maximum number of people in shul. You want to make a big announcement. You want everyone to know about it. So if you do it in the morning, before everyone shows up in shul, right? We all know, unfortunately, right? Shacharit in the morning, shul is, probably double the size by the time you get to Musaf, depending on what shul you go to, but there's different, it happens to be that more people come later. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is the way we do it. Again, there's different customs. Some people do it in the Shmona Esrei, the repetition of Shmona Esrei. Some people do it, in fact, it's much more common in Israel, to do it before Shmona Esrei. If you do it before Shmona Esrei, we have what's called Tfilat Geshem, and the Chazan says this. Now, you can't do that in Shacharit. Why? Because Shacharit, you have first Shema, and then the Amidah, and you can't make a break. You have to be Somech Geula L'Tfilah. We learned this in Masechet Brachot. You have to say Ga'al Yisrael and then immediately daven. You can't put in some extra tefillah before Shmona Esrei. You could only do it in Musaf. So maybe that's another reason to push it off to Musaf. So either way, there's a bunch of different reasons. There's more given than the ones I'm mentioning. You can research it if you want. It's interesting, but there's different approaches to try to figure out why this is. There's really, right, there's a good example of, we kind of read it yesterday and, you're just used to what you do. So you figure this is normal, but really it's a kind of a question. Why wouldn't you start earlier? And in fact, that's what they're going to ask right now. Hey, Rabbi Yoshua, what Rabbi Yoshua is this? That Rabbi Yehuda mentioned it in his name. Ilema Rabbi Yoshua did not nitin. Okay, there's Rabbi Yoshua now. The Rabbi Yoshua in the Mishnah, the Rabbi Yoshua in the Braita are the same Rabbi Yoshua. However, there are a little bit of different approaches. In our Mishnah, it just said 8th day, right? It didn't say, or, the last day of Sukkot, whatever that means. In the Braita, it said when you put down the lulav. So it's the same Rabbi Yoshua, it's the same person, but maybe there are slightly different versions of Rabbi Yoshua. So what they want to say is like this, let's try both, and neither of them really fit. If you say Rabbi Yoshua of our Mishnah, what did he say? Ha'amal biyom tov ha'achron shachagu maskil. And that would mean on, let's just assume the latest in the morning. There's no reason to wait till afternoon. And Ela Rabbi Yeshua de Braita Hamar Mishat Hanachato. He said, as soon as you stop taking the lulav. So according to that, you would for sure say that you would start at night, because it's as soon as you're not taking the lulav anymore, you should be saying Mashiva Ruach Morida Geshem. So we're now going to say, and furthermore, Vitu, as I mentioned this before, but we didn't see it yet inside. Ha Detanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Ben Betera. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Ben Betera, the exact same thing, which is Detanya. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Ben Betera. Mishum Ben Betera ha'over lefnei hateva b'yom tov ha'acharon shel chag ha'acharon maskir. Okay, exactly the same thing he said in the name of Ben Betera. So again, we have three sources. One is Rabbi Yehuda by himself. One is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Yeshua. One is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Ben Betera. And now we want to say, well, if we want to say it's Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah, first of all, it doesn't work. It doesn't work like Rabbi Yeshua in our Braita. Neither of them fit, because either you'd say it in the morning or you would say it the night before. And if you want to say that, who's this Ben Betera? If there's Rabbi Yeshua, there's Ben Betera, it's very confusing. Did he say the name of Ben Betera? Did he say the name of Rabbi Yeshua? Hey, Ben Betera, what Ben Betera is this? Now, who's the most famous Ben Betera? He's the one we happened to mention yesterday in our Braita. If you want to say, Ilema Rabbi Yehuda Ben Betera, okay, he's the most famous Ben Betera, the son of Betera, Rabbi Yehuda. Ha'amal b'sheni b'chagu maskir. Remember Rabbi Yehuda Ben Betera? He says, when do we say it? On day number 2, which means you certainly wouldn't be saying it on the last day. You would have said it way before that. So it can't be him. So to resolve all these questions, we have a very simple answer. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak tehei b'Rabbi Yeshua ben Betera zimnin dekari le b'shmei zimnin dekari le b'shmei da'aba. There was another Tana called Rabbi Yehoshua ben Betera. He must be the guy. It's not our Rabbi Yeshua. Now there's laws, there's rules. When somebody appears without a name, without a last name, okay, their last names are son of. When someone appears without son of, who is it? There's traditions, there's books written about this, about, whenever you see Rabbi Elazar without a name, that's Rabbi Elazar ben Pedad. Whenever you see Rabbi Yeshua, that's Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. So we assumed when it says Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Yeshua is Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, which is our same Rabbi Yeshua. But no, they say, this Rabbi Yeshua must be, right? Sometimes there's always things that break the rules. It's true that usually when you say Rabbi Yeshua, that's what it means. In this case, it means a different Rabbi Yeshua. And since we have another clue, we have a Ben Betera, right? We have this exact same statement said in the name of Ben Betera. It must be, it's Rabbi Yeshua ben Betera, and that resolves all our problems, okay? Now, the only thing we have to figure out is, so why in one place does Rabbi Yehuda say it in the name of Ben Betera, and in one place Rabbi Yeshua? They're very different, right? To call someone son of, right? It's like I don't know, in the army or in other places, people always call you by your last name. So on the basketball court or I don't know what, but right, people get called by their last name. So why were they calling him by his last name? And sometimes by a much more respectful term, Rabbi Yehoshua. So sometimes he called him by his name. Sometimes he called him in the name of his father. Oh, it was a matter of, did he already have smicha or did he not have smicha? Before he had smicha, he was known as Ben Betera. When he had smicha, already he was called Rabbi Yeshua. So that resolves our issue. It's a whole different, somebody else entirely, which then would imply that according to Rabbi Yeshua, whose opinion we go by, apparently we go by his opinion in terms of the day, but not in terms of when in the day. We actually hold, and we only say it in Musaf time. Okay, that was the whole first section of today's daf, which, just to review, we took this issue of Nisuch HaMayim that we discussed yesterday. We showed there's different sources for it. There's some people who connect that with when we say rain. There's some people who don't. They connected to Lulav and Etrog. There were these 4 opinions that kind of split in half. And then we saw that there were different opinions for where we get Nisuch HaMayim from the Torah. Is it even in the Torah? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a tradition, right? Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And then we tried to figure out who this Rabbi Yoshua is. Now we're going to go into something totally different, which is, until now, and I told you we get to the wind part. Till now, we've been talking about when do we mention rain. And rain, okay, in both, if you've read the intros, you've heard some of the intros, if you were at the CM yesterday, we talked a lot about the fact that rain is this idea that connects us with God, right? It's something because rain, sometimes God stops the rain. It's a way for us to connect with him through prayer, other ways, because we need to pray for rain. We need the rain. Now the Gemara is going to tell us it's true for rain, but it's not true for other phenomena of nature. Okay, and we're going to go through, and then we're going to question some of these assumptions they're making. So first they mention dew, tal, and ruchot, winds. Now what's interesting about both dew and rains is we do mention them. In the summer months in Israel and not in America for Ashkenazim, but yes, in America for Sephardim, they say molid hatal. Okay, we bring down the dew. And in fact, we even say, everybody says, v'tein tal umatal, bring the dew and the rain, libracha, for blessing. That's going to come from here. So, and as we're not going to talk about v'tein tal umatal, but you're going to see a reference to tal of bracha versus tal not of bracha. There's dew that's good and there's dew that's not good. But now the Gemara is going to say, they're going to bring a braita, Tana, Bital u'buchot lo chivu chachamim laskil. You don't have to mention dew. And that's why, in fact, in America, Ashkenazim don't say, or in most, I think most places abroad, they do not say Morid Hatal in their davening. It depends where you are and where you live and what your prayers became influenced by, more by Chutz La'aretz davening or sometimes more by Israel davening. You don't need to mention it. You also don't need to mention, interestingly, the wind. That's why I said Mashiva Ruach u'Morid Geshem is actually not really so fair, because according to the rabbis, you have to mention rain, Morida Geshem. You don't have to say Mashiva Ruach, even though it became the norm that we do say it. Im balaskil, maskil. But if you want to, you can. And that's in fact what we do, where people will say Morida Tal in the summer, again, depending on your custom. And they say Mashiva Ruach and Morida Geshem. This, everybody mentions the winds. But you don't really need to. Why? My timer, Amar Rabbi Chanina, because they never actually stop. They're constants. So now we want to know, how do we know this? And this I always like to mention, which is okay, Becky, wait with your question. We're going to get to that. Which is when you want to prove something, which is, let's say, a natural phenomenon, you want to prove, is there dew? Does it stop? Do the winds stop? Okay, what would you do? You'd look outside your window and check, talk to meteorologists. No, in the Gemara, they find it in verses in the Torah. So here's our proof. Vayomer Eliyahu tishbi mitoshvei Gilad el Achav. So Eliyahu says to Achav, if you remember, there was a big drought. Hi, Hashem Elokei Yisrael asher amadti lefanav im yashanim ha'ela talu matal ki im lefi dvari. Basically, Eliyahu says God's cursing you, and there's not going to be rain or dew, which is interesting because it sounds like God is stopping dew. We're going to have to deal with that in a minute. And right now, they're bringing this to prove dew doesn't stop. So hold off. Uchtiv, and then it says lecher et Achav el Achav, go el Achav, go appear to Achav. This is later on. Ve'etna matar pnei adama, and I will bring rain. Right, and then you're going to prove God is the one bringing the rain. Ve'ilu talo ka'amarle. Now, when God says go show Achav, I'm going to bring the rain right now, He doesn't say do. Okay, so my timer. What's the reason? Mishum de lo yatzer. Okay, because it never stops. Okay, so now we have to obviously resolve the problem. If it never stops, why did he say in the beginning, I won't bring dew? So why did he swear in the beginning that I wasn't going to bring dew? So this is what he's saying. In other words, there's two kinds of rain. This is dew. This is what I said before. Why do we say libracha? Because there's dew that's bad and there's dew that's good. The dew that never stops, there's dew all the time. Some could be good, some could be bad. You might not have dew of bracha. And in the time of Eliyahu, God took away the dew that was good dew. Okay, and this is going to get to a whole theme that we're going to talk about all throughout this Masechet, is that even though we're always asking for rain and rain is so good, rain isn't always so good. And dew isn't always so good. There's different aspects of it and different ways it comes, and it's not always a positive thing. So dew is a constant. However, sometimes it's detrimental to what you're growing, and sometimes it's good. So what God stopped in those days was the dew of bracha. So now the question is, if that's the case, right? Why didn't he say, I'm going to now bring the rain and I'm going to bring the good dew back? So the obvious reason why he didn't say this is Mishum Delomin Karamilta, because it's not so obvious. They were trying to have a showdown with Achav. I'm going to show you that God is God, and he's going to bring the rain, and he's going to bring the healthy dew. Now, try to differentiate between healthy dew and not healthy dew. It's not something super easily measurable. That there's rain and there's no rain is very clear. So when he came to say, I'm bringing the rain and I'm going to show you that I'm your God, he wanted to make a very clear, noticeable something. And talking about the dew was not going to be very noticeable, and therefore he didn't mention it. So that dealt with the first part of the Braita, which said dew never stops. We just proved it from the psukim with Eliyahu and Achav. Ruchot minalan de lama. What about winds? How do we know this? Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Damar Kra, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, the pasuk says, Ki ka'arba ruchot hashamayim perasti etchem ne'um Hashem. Okay, it's a pasuk from Zechariah. I'm going to spread you around like the four winds in the heavens. So Micah Amar Lahu, what does he mean exactly? If God's saying, I'm going to spread you in the four corners of the earth, then it should have said in the four corners, not like the four winds, right? Four winds, winds also mean directions. So he would have said, I'm going to spread you in the four winds, not ki. Ki means like the winds. So what does it mean? Ki, elahachi kamar. Kishem she'iyafshar la'olam below ruchot, kach iyafshar la'olam below Yisrael. It's a fascinating statement. Just like the world can't live without the winds, and I'm going to spread you to the four corners of the earth, but I'm going to do it like the winds, meaning I'm going to do it because you're like the wind. Every place needs wind because otherwise it gets too hot. You need the wind to cool things down. Okay, living in Vernon in the summer, I can tell you really do need wind and we don't really have it. You really need wind. But in addition, I'm going to do it. And so I'm going to spread you to the four corners like the winds because this is almost, I would say like an anti-Zionist line. It's saying there's importance to having Jews in every place in the world. That's what it's basically saying. And maybe because Jews are Or LaGoyim, right? We believe that we can bring a certain light. Whether it's true or not, that's a whole separate question. But that's a concept, right? That we bring light to the world. And therefore, you need Jews in all places of the earth. And that's what it's talking about. And then we're like the wind, that we're constant. Okay. And there you see that the wind is a constant. So Amar Rabbi Chanina, based on all this, we're now going to get to some halacha. Hilkach, and this sounds like, right, if you look in Sidurim, they start telling you, what do you do if you forgot Mashiva Ruach and Marita Geshem in the winter? And what if you said it in the summer? And what if, you do this, you're supposed to go back, or you're not? This comes from here. Amar Rabbi Chanina, based on all these things, Hilkach, B'yamot Chama, in the summer months, Amar Mashiva Ruach, if you say God brings the wind, that's fine. God brings the wind all the time. So that's fine. You don't have to go back. But Amar Marita Geshem, because you're saying God brings the rains in a time when it's not rains and you can't be doing that. That's not true. So you'd have to go back. If it's B'yamot Shamim in the winter month, in the winter months, Amal lo amar Mashiva Ruach, machzirin oto. If you didn't say God brings the wind, let's say you accidentally, now you wouldn't really do this because we always put it together, but let's say you just say Morida Geshem. It'll be fine because we already said you don't have to mention the winds. But lo amar Morida Geshem machzirin oto. But if you don't say Morida Geshem, and this is where we get the halacha from. Once we start saying Morida Geshem, if you forget it, you have to go back to the beginning and daven again. V'lo od ela, and not only that, this is a very strange line. Ela afilu amal ma'avir haruach u'mafriach hatal ein machzirin oto. Even if you said some nonsensical statement like God moves away the wind and He causes the dew to go flying and not actually do what it's supposed to do, you wouldn't have to go back to the beginning of your prayer. Why not? First of all, it would be a problem. It's a hefsek. You shouldn't say nonsense in the middle of your prayer. But if you did, let's say, then it's true. It's a nonsensical statement and you shouldn't say that, but you actually don't have to go back. It's not something that makes you go back. It means if I talk in the middle of my prayer, which you're not supposed to do, you don't have to go back to the beginning. You just continue from where you're up to. That's a separate thing. This really doesn't, it's kind of a non sequitur. Okay, Taanit. Now we're going to quote another bright. This is very similar to the previous one, except instead of dew, they're now saying clouds. Clouds and winds, the rabbis didn't force us, right? The rabbis didn't say you have to mention it. If you want to, you can. I never heard anyone say anything about clouds in their davening, but theoretically, if you wanted to, you could. My taima, again, mishum telomi atzre. So now, because they never stop. So again, the Gemara is going to ask, telomi atzre, they really don't. V'hatani Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef brought the following bright. Now here is going to be an interesting explanation to a sentence that you've heard many times. You say it in Shema every day, and you might not have ever thought of it this way. What does it say there? Right? If it happens that where we don't listen to the mitzvot, God will stop the heavens and will not bring rain. So when you think of stop the heavens, what do you think? Stop and not bring rain. This brightness is no. What does it mean? Atzaret hashamayim min ha'avim min haruchot. I'm going to stop the sky from having clouds and winds. So now the Braita asks, typical form of a Braita, like a Midrash Halakha type Braita, atal mir min ha'avim min haruchot. Is that what you really think it means? Oh, eina ela min ha'matar. Maybe it means from the rains, like we would have thought. So kashu omer v'lo yeh matar harei matar amur. But it already says, and there won't be rains. They're assuming these are two different things. God will stop the heavens, and there won't be rain, two separate things. So it already says there won't be rain after. So therefore, it must mean min ha'avim min haruchot. It must be coming to talk about some other phenomenon that God is going to stop. He's going to stop the clouds from coming and the winds from coming. So once we have this, we now have a problem because we just quoted a braita a minute before that said winds and clouds are always there. So one braita says they're always there. One braita says they move. So they could potentially stop. So the winds is a contradiction and the clouds are a contradiction. So the Gemara answers, avim lo kasha, haba chorfe, haba afle. There's 3 different ways to explain this, but I'll explain it one way, which is there's winds, but there's clouds that come before the rain, and there's clouds that come after the rain. The clouds that come before the rain are constants. The clouds that come, right, you never have rain without clouds, but sometimes you have clouds after rain and sometimes you don't. That's something that's not a constant. And apparently the clouds after the rains are a good thing, and that's something that God could potentially stop. Ruchot ruchot lo kasha. What about the winds? Habaruch mitzuya, habaruch she'ena mitzuya. There's regular winds, and then there's super strong winds. The super strong winds are the ones that sometimes don't come, and sometimes those are needed. Okay, we don't always have those. So ruach she'ena mitzuya, they say, wait, but why don't, now the idea is that these things have to be in a category where they're good and God could stop them. However, it's not important enough that we need to mention it in our prayer. Okay, it has to be this in between. So they say, but what do you mean? The ruach she'ena mitzuya is very important. For when we do the winnowing, what do? We throw up with a pitchfork the straw, right? The wheat and the chaff, and the chaff is supposed to blow away, and we're left with the wheat. So the Gemara says, it's really important for when we do the winnowing. So it should be a problem. Like we want the ruach she'ena mitzuya. It's very necessary. Why don't we pray for it? You could do it by hand. In other words, you don't have to do it by the winds. There's a way to do it otherwise, and that's why it's important, but not necessary. We don't have to say it in our prayers. Another bright. Okay, now we're going to talk about how important things are. The clouds and the winds are secondary to the rain, which means that they're important. They come after and it's necessary. So, hechidami, what's the case? Amar Ula v'itema Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Yehuda it should be. Either Rav Yehuda or Ula said it. Remember Rav Yehuda, because in a minute he's going to make another statement. To Batar Mitra, what they're talking about is the winds and the clouds after the rain are important. L'meimer Demal Yutahi, it sounds like you're saying they're important, they're good. But Haktiv, it says in a verse, in the curses, in the Sefer Dvarim, there's a list of curses that will come on the Jewish people. Yitain Hashem et mitaretzecha avak va'afal. God is going to make your rain into dust and dirt. It's going to cover your grains and ruin the crop. So what do they say? V'amar ula v'itema Rav Yehuda, zika debatar mitra. This is the winds that come after the rain is going to basically, right? Imagine what happens. It rains. The winds come. It gets full of dust and dirt. It sticks on, right? It throws all the dirt and the dust onto the crops and ruins it. So that sounds like it's a bad thing. So they say it all depends. And that's really going to be the theme here. Lo kasha, hada atanicha, hada atirazia. There's a way it comes pleasantly down, right? A nice wind. And then there's a very strong wind. The strong wind will ruin it, right? Hada maleavak. The strong wind will bring all the dust. Hada lo maleavak. The light wind is not going to bring. But Amar Rav Yehuda, another statement of Rav Yehuda. Zika debatar mitra kimitra. The rains that come, the wind that comes after the rain is a blessing. It's like more rain. It's as if it rains more. Eva debatar mitra kimitra. The clouds, if clouds come in the sky after, that's also as if it rained more. Shimsha debatar mitra kitrei mitre. This is the best, right? We all love this. When the sun comes out after the rain, that's like, it's as if you got double the rain, meaning it helps. All these things affect the crops, that if the sun comes out after, that actually is a blessing for the rain. Eva debatar mitra kimitra. Shimsha, I said that, sorry. Lemeutemai. So it's saying all these things are good, but what's bad then? It's kind of saying this is a good sign, this is a good sign. So what's a bad sign? So they say lemeute gilhe delelia, when it lightnings, when the lightning comes, that's bad. The shimsha debene karche, if it's partly cloudy after, that's not good. You want either clouds or sun, but not partly cloudy. Last statement for today. Amarava male tigla liture kechamisha mitra la'ara. The snow in the mountains is like 5 times rain. It's like the best thing there is, right? Shene'emar ki l'sheleg yomar have aretz v'geshem matar v'geshem mitrot uzo. It describes the sheleg as saying the snow will be like geshem, which is one language of rain, matal, another, geshem, and mitrot is plural. So it's 5 languages of saying what the snow is, 5 languages of rain. It's like 5 times rain. And Amarava Talga Lature, Mitra Razia Ilane, Mitra Nicha Lapere. Okay, I'll explain what I mean. The snow for the mountains, the hard rains for the trees. The light rains are good for the crops. Or pila, afilu lepartzida detute kale mahanyale. And the very, like the, the drizzles are good for the seeds in the ground. They want to know or how do you get that's seeds that's good for the seeds in the ground? It's called what do you say? Forget the word, but no trikon in Hebrew, where it's an abbreviation of uru pile, which is wake up, you seeds. Okay, or wake up things that are under the ground. Rashi explains it as it closes off the cracks in the land to basically make things grow better. And that's what we see. All things are good signs. So just to do a little bit of a summary, I think what they're trying to say is there's a place for everything in nature, and it's really trying to get to the centrality of rain, how important rain is, and how rain is the one thing that really connects us to God more so than any other phenomena of nature. Okay, with that, we will end for today. Have a great day, everyone.